The hot hatchback market is an interesting one, with Volkswagen's GTI being the perennial favorite for several decades at this point. There's been competition from all sorts of different manufacturers with a plethora of different models, and Hyundai has finally thrown their hat into the ring with the 2019 Veloster N. I've had the Veloster N for about a week, and I am giving it back tomorrow, and I have quite a few thoughts to share, all of which are actually fairly positive. Hyundai is in their second generation for the Veloster, and the 2019 Veloster N is their first real super spicy hot hatch. They had a slightly hotted up version in the first generation of the Veloster, but the Veloster N, which is new for 2019, is the first one to really take things and spice them up quite a bit. The Veloster N takes the regular Veloster's 201 horsepower and cranks it up to 250. And there's a few little performance enhancements besides the power upgrade. However, the car that I'm driving is the Veloster N with the $2,000 performance package option, which adds quite a bit of pretty real performance kit to the car. So you take the Veloster N's base 250 horsepower and it gets amped up to 275 horsepower. That gets put through a real mechanical limited slip differential, which is electronically controlled for variable lockup. You get 19-inch wheels versus the regular N's 18-inch wheels, and those come with bigger brakes underneath them. You get adaptive dampers, so you can stiffen up or soften the suspension based on what driving you're going to be doing. And you also get an active exhaust that can be made louder or quieter based on the type of driving you're doing. The first thing to point out with the Veloster N is that, especially in performance pack guys, it is noticed by a lot of people. The first person I noticed checking me out while driving this was a woman in a newer Hyundai Kona. Not someone you'd think would be checking this out, but the car's looks and the sound, frankly, really make a lot of people turn their heads, whether they're driving or walking on the sidewalk or anything. This car is kind of the anti-Volkswagen GTI. It's almost a Focus ST or Fiesta ST for the people who miss those now that they're recently discontinued by Ford. The GTI is much more buttoned up. It's kind of a hot hatch that always wears a suit, and this is more of a hot hatch that's always ready to party a little bit. So certainly a little bit different vibe going on, but it's a fun one. And the nice thing is the car's chassis and performance dynamic can actually back up what the looks are serving. Now, I had asked Hyundai if I could take this car to a track cross, which is more or less an autocross put on a section of a real racetrack circuit. There's one that was about an hour from home at Summit Point Raceway. Unfortunately, Hyundai has a policy where their press cars cannot go to any sort of motorsport type event. Maybe I can get some sort of exception later on down the road with a future Hyundai press loan, but they told me this one had to stick to actual public roads and no sort of competition. So I worked with what I had, and 3 of us took this car out for a day of hiking and exploring the Shenandoah Valley in central Virginia. Now, on the surface, that doesn't sound tremendously exciting, but it did give me a great way, after I left my 2 companions at the trailhead, to run up and down a couple mountain roads and really get a feel for this car's chassis. These are bigger mountain roads where the speed limit is 55, but the turns are so tight that no one will ever actually do 55. So thankfully, I was not encountering really any traffic at all, and was able to probe the limits of the chassis a little bit while still keeping things legal and in one lane and, nothing too crazy. But the nice thing is that drive, that whole weekend adventure, plus all of my time just driving around Washington, D.C. and various Northern Virginia city and suburb type streets, is that it shows how well this car works as a dual purpose car. A lot of people that are buying hot hatches are looking for something that they can drive to work every day, but then go and hit a back road or hit an autocross or hit a track day and have a very competent vehicle. And then they also want something that can take a couple friends with them or throw an IKEA load in the back. And the Veloster N mostly delivers on all of those premises. When it comes to the performance driving aspect of it, like I said, this car with the performance package has more or less adaptive everything. So when you're in normal mode, everything is soft, everything is quiet, but when you put it in sport mode, the suspension stiffens up, the exhaust gets louder, the steering gets tighter, and you can also turn on an auto rev matching feature. So the car will electronically rev match to help with your downshifts. The pedals are placed pretty well for heel toe, but for those who are perhaps less well versed in the art of heel toe downshifting, the car can help you out a little bit, and it's one less item for you to focus quite as exclusively on while driving. So when you put it in that back road, track, autocrossy, whatever, party mode, everything stiffens up and it really is quite a competent chassis. There's very, very minimal torque steer, which I really appreciated. I owned a Focus ST when those came out in 2013, and Ford had kind of promised there's no torque steer, and there was actually a lot of torque steer. This is not the case in the Hyundai, which is a very, very welcome change. So you get a teeny little bit of it when you're off the line in first gear if you're really hammering on it, and then after that, things sort out pretty quickly. I think the real limited slip diff helps put that power down quite a bit. And to that point, when you're trying to put some power down out of a corner, the diff does its work as well. It's just a real treat to have an actual limited slip differential, especially with a high horsepower front wheel drive car. I've got some time in some friends' Volkswagen GTIs over the years, and having driven those that have just the electronic differential versus a true mechanical limited slip in the Volkswagen variants, it makes a really big difference. And of course, if you're going to put the power down, you have to also be able to turn and stop. Like I said, the steering firms up when you're in sport mode, and it seems a little excessive if you're just driving to and from work, but when you start hitting the back roads with a little bit more abandon, it's very well weighted. It's electronic power steering, as many cars are at this point, and I think it's very well weighted, it's fairly communicative, and I had no real issues with it. When it comes to the brakes, they are, like I said, larger on the performance package as opposed to the regular N, and they are totally fine. Given I was not in any sort of repeated lapping scenario or hitting back roads for a very extended period of time with a lot of switchbacks and downhills, I didn't get a chance to see how well the brakes hold up to repeated heavy use. So I can't really comment on how they are in that case as far as the pads, the rotors, the fluid, the everything, but for a random little back road jaunts, they do more than fine. Obviously, if you're going to take one of these cars and put it on the track for frequent track days or something, you'd probably want some dedicated track pads and a better brake fluid than what's put in from the factory. But if you're just hitting the occasional back road, this is totally fine as they send it to you. One other thing to mention is just general drivetrain as far as putting the power down and working with it. I've had some time in a Civic Type R or 2 recently, and that seems to be a car that's billed as one of the competitors to this Veloster N. I don't know if I'd personally go that far, but one thing that the Civic Type R has that this car has less of is turbo lag. The Veloster N does a really good job with spooling the turbo up quickly when you need it and really putting that power down. And it's backed up by actually a very nice, smooth shifting 6-speed manual transmission. That's the only option on the Veloster N. So the clutch is easy to work in traffic, but then once you start cruising on a back road and asking for quicker shifts, it's very easy to work the shifter, good feel, nice direct, precise action. A lot of people seem to be big fans of Honda gearboxes, and this feels very similar to that as far as how things go. Now, I will say, for all of the fun I had in sport mode by myself on back roads, sport mode on the street, driving to work, driving around the city, driving with people in the car is fairly excessive. The ride gets pretty harsh, and the exhaust is loud and boomy, but to that end, you've got other drive modes. You don't need sport mode all the time. So the car is fairly pleasant in normal and eco modes. The suspension softens up well enough to make things pretty compliant. The one complaint that I had, even with the car in eco mode, and this is just kind of a factor of this car's roots, there is a bit of interior noise at highway speeds. There's a bit of tire noise, and that can get a little tiresome unless you have the radio on to kind of drown that out, or you're talking with your passengers quite a bit. But you will never mistake the interior noise of this car for something like a Mercedes or a BMW. It's just not, it doesn't have that insulation to it, which is totally fine for the price point. As far as general practicality is concerned, like I said, I have had 3 or 4 people in this car at different points throughout the week. The back seat is pretty tight if you're tall, and that's just kind of given the sloping roof line of the car. I'm about 6'1", and I can fit for a very short trip I've been in these cars earlier in the calendar year, and like I said, I fit, but it's not tremendously pleasant. The people I had back there at different points during the week were shorter than I am, and they said it was fine, although the longest drive we took was maybe an hour and 45 minutes. So I don't know if you'd want to have this car full of 4 people for a 4 to 5 hour trip. But for shorter drives, it's absolutely fine. The rear seats do fold down, and the overall cargo space is fairly large. The two things that kind of contribute in a negative way are the general size of the hatch opening and then the very high liftover height. That just kind of comes with the design territory of this car. It's not quite as squared off as what you'd get in like a Civic hatchback or a GTI. But again, if you want the funkiness, you're going to deal with some of those little compromises. And again, my Focus ST was kind of similar. So not all bad, but something to be aware of. And then as far as general creature comforts, the Veloster N is a little interesting because Hyundai has the non-N variant of the Veloster, and there is a turbo version of it, which makes about 201 horsepower. And you can get that Veloster Turbo with heated leather seats, a heads-up display, a sunroof. So you would think that the Veloster N, being the ultimate, highest-end version of the Veloster that also happens to go fast and be performance-oriented, would have all of those features available, and it actually doesn't. So my Veloster N that I'm driving has unheated cloth seats, it doesn't have a sunroof, it doesn't have a heads-up display, and that's okay. It is kind of a back-to-the-basics type of car, and that's very much okay. The other thing that it doesn't have that the non-N versions of the Veloster do have is all of the driver assistance technology. So you do not get any sort of blind spot monitoring, lane keep assist, emergency braking. You don't have any of that. So clearly Hyundai is trying to keep this car on a little bit more of a one-track mind, which, again, it's fine. Some people are really looking for that. I think some people are also looking for that performance car that can have all of those extra options. So just something to keep in mind. And then there's some other nice touches that I really appreciate. So, for example, the key. It sounds silly. It's a keyless go sort of fob, so there's no actual key to put in and turn. But the key is nicely weighted. It's got a little bit of a soft touch material coating it. And that is something that stands out to me. It makes a good first impression when you get the key for the first time. And then when you're carrying the key around, it just feels kind of nice in your pocket. It's something nice to hold, or if someone asks to see it, or if someone borrows a car, it's just something nice to pass around. The other nice thing, you've got your main gauges in the cluster, and then you've got this little color LCD screen. You can see oil temperature, torque that the car is putting out, how much pressure the turbo is building. But that screen also will show you what you are doing with your lighting and windshield wiper stalks. So if you turn the headlight stalk to the running lights or the headlights, it will show you the progression of the stalk as you move it forward and back. It'll do the same thing as you move the washer stalk up and down. So it goes from off to intermediate to low to high. And it sounds like a silly little thing to appreciate, but if you are fumbling around with different controls in the dark, your positions of your windshield wiper stalk are not lit up. That's something you don't see in any car. But to have it shown on the center screen as you move it around in real time is a very nice touch, especially for a Hyundai. And I've tried to keep a lot of my thoughts this whole week away from the for a Hyundai mentality, because I think this car stands on its own regardless of what brand is stuck on the airbag cover. But Hyundai is still a little bit of an economy-minded brand in a lot of people's eyes, and when you see these nice touches being added in, they're thoughtful. It's the surprise and delight factor. So I really, really appreciate that, and it's something that you really don't see on every brand and on every model. So definitely nice touches to have. So the one final piece of this whole Veloster N equation is the value behind it. And like I said, my test car is the Veloster N base plus performance package. This is effectively the highest trim Veloster N you can get, and this comes in with an MSRP of $29,855. So I think it's a pretty good value. I think if you put it against the competitors that are for sale brand new, which to me is the likes of the Volkswagen GTI, the Civic Si, this comes in at a similar price point. You can get into one of these for $26,000, $27,000 if you don't get the performance package, and then you're still under $30,000 if you're fully decked out. The one thing that really helps this car stand out, especially at that price point, is that you still get a pretty good warranty, which is one of those Hyundai hallmarks of days past and current. So for the $29,855, you get the fully loaded 275 horsepower version of this car with all the performance goodies, and you get a bumper-to-bumper 5-year, 60,000-mile warranty with a 10-year, 100,000-mile warranty on the powertrain. That is pretty wild for what this car is and what it can be to the different types of owners it will have. I think that is where the value is very strong for the money. The equivalent piece where this car can fall a little bit flat compared to the competition is with the interior quality. So looking around, there's a lot of hard plastics. It is not quite as upscale feeling, if you will, as a GTI. And that is the biggest problem with the Veloster N, is that the Volkswagen GTI exists. You get a slightly more premium feeling vehicle in the GTI. That said, you don't get the drama, the flair, the personality that comes along with the Veloster N if you walk out with a GTI. But to that point, I don't really know if Veloster N and GTI shoppers are going to be cross-shopping the two very hard. I think if you're looking for a GTI and you're that kind of person, you will always gravitate towards a GTI. I think if you're looking at the Civic Si, maybe a Subaru WRX, if you were looking at a slightly pre-owned Ford ST Twin, I think that's where you're going to look at this Veloster N, brand new, see the warranty, see all the performance kit, drive it and see how good the chassis is, and see where the value comes together if that's your goal. It is not going to be the hot hatch in a suit that the GTI is, but I also think that's okay. And for more on what LGBT motorsports competitors are doing and driving, please head over to outmotorsports.com. We are also on Facebook and now Instagram as Out Motorsports. Thanks so much, and we'll see you soon.